Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of March of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about Saudi Arabia, where probably the longest talks, the longest negotiation process since the beginning of the special military operation, and that we are talking about the talks between Russia, between Ukraine and the United States of America. Today we got report that Russia and US negotiations in Riyadh have ended. They lasted more than 12 hours. RIA Novosti correspondent reports, if we summarize everything, if we summarize timings of every single talks that took place in Riyadh during the previous 48 hours, we're talking about negotiations between Russia and the United States of America, between Ukraine and the United States of America. Altogether, it took place more than 17 hours. Once again, the longest negotiation process, the longest talks since the beginning of the special military operation. And of course, everybody was waiting for something. Everybody was waiting for some breakthrough in the relations. We're waiting for some breakthrough in the question of the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. But telling the truth, we did not get anything. For example, right after the talks ended, we got a very important report that the joint statement from Russia and US following the talks in Riyadh will be published tomorrow. But today, by the end of the 25th of March of 2025, we still haven't received anything. The sources reported that the Russians, the Americans and the Ukrainians were trying to make this common statement all together by describing the situation, one statement by another, one statement after another, but sources reported that sides haven't managed to find a common solution, so that's why they decided not to publish anything then. Later we got report that the Russians will give us some insights and will give us some information regarding this negotiation process, and this will be made by the Minister of the Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov. And I would like to point your attention that the Russians is the only side that gave us at least something about this negotiation process. Neither Ukrainians nor the Americans haven't published anything and are not going to do this. So when talking about the Russians, they were talking a lot. They were talking about European countries, about the United States of America. Let's discuss the most important statements made by Lavrov after the negotiation process in Riyadh. The delegations discussed issues of safe shipping in the Black Sea. So that was the main topic. The Russians want to sell their wheat, and they want to sell their grain, they want to sell fertilizers, and they want to get access to the world market of insurance, because this is the main problem for the Russians. They can't insure their cargoes and their products that goes through the sea, and most likely the Russians managed to find a solution. Another important demand from the Russian side is not to allow the Ukrainians to sell, let's say, different products using the Black Sea, and then when returning back to Odessa with empty ships, to bring weapons in these empty ships. So this is the main demand from the Russian side. Furthermore, the Russians stated that the United States of America is the only country that can force the Ukrainians to follow this possible agreement. But despite all these talks, despite all these statements, and despite the longest negotiation process ever since the beginning of the special military operation, we still haven't seen even a single document. The first thing, and the second thing, we still haven't seen even a single statement or heard even a single statement both from the Russians, Americans or the Ukrainians. When is going to start, when is the exact date when the parties are going to sign anything? When is going to happen the exact date when this ceasefire on the Black Sea is going to start? As for now, we don't have anything about this. So most likely the parties, despite a lot of talks, despite the longest process, they haven't managed to find a common solution. So which means that the special military operation will continue. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, because during the previous 24 hours we got lots of very important updates, and the most important are coming as usually from the Suja direction, from the Suma, from the Belgorod direction. First, let's discuss the situation in the city of Sumi. In this video we can see very heavy explosion, and you know that this is very important piece of news, because the Ukrainians are saying that this explosion took place as a result of Russian missile strike or Iskander strike. Some civilian was feeling some fire on the territory of the central part of Sumi, but later we got details and different analysis from different sources where people focused attention that there were no missile strike during the explosion. So the sources are saying that there was a fire, there was like industrial corporation, industrial company in this part of the Sumi, and there were ammo depot and warehouse probably somewhere in the basements, and there was a fire and then there was explosion. So the military experts are saying that that wasn't Russian attack, that was just an explosion on the military facility of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's discuss the situation along the border. Today we got lots of reports that the Russians crossed the border with Sumy region in several places. According to information we have, the Russians currently are advancing in the village of Volodymyrovka. Furthermore, several sources reported that the Russians entered the village of Vodolahi. As for this report, we got confirmation from neutral mappers. Several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to enter small village by the name of Veselyevka. The Russians answered this territory from the settlement by the name of a bit to the north, Uspienovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the territory of the village of Zhuravka. This information was confirmed by geolocation published by the Ukrainian side. Here we can see Ukraine attack on the Russian soldier that was trying to save his life from Ukrainian drone. Furthermore, we got report that the Russians managed to cut pocket between the villages of Novenka, Basovka and the settlement of Gogolevka. So as we can see, this is approximately the area of where the Russians are trying to improve their positions by taking additional territories under complete control, and we see that currently the clashes are taking place already on the territory of the Sumy region. So this is already a secure zone that the president of the Russian Federation several weeks ago was talking about. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kursk region. We have lots of very important updates. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of decisive offensive operation, managed to answer the checkpoint along the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. This information yesterday was provided us by the group of forces north, and today we have the same report from another pro-Russian resource. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians answered this block post and this checkpoint along the border, and at the same time the Ukrainians still had and still have their positions in the southern and in the central part of the settlement by the name of Gogolevka. And according to information we have, the Russians, by taking this checkpoint under complete control, managed to cut the Ukrainians in the settlement of Gogolevka from supply and support. And now the Russians are saying that these Ukrainians currently were caught in cauldron by the Russians, so without any possibilities for evacuation. So we believe that this upcoming night between the 25th and the 26th of March of 2025, the Ukrainians will try to break through the encirclement with the purpose to get to the border and to evacuate their servicemen in the safe place. If the Ukrainians are not going to do this upcoming night, or are not able to finish this evacuation successfully, then most likely they would be destroyed on the territory of Gogolevka, because they are there already caught in cauldron. Another important video was published by the Russian side from the border, and in this video we can see the Russian FPV drone that was built based on the fiber optic technology. And this drone, as you can see, was flying exactly above this block post, above this checkpoint between the territory of the Russian Federation and the territory of Ukraine. So this is very important video, and first of all, this video shows that there are no more Ukrainians on the territory of this construction of these facilities, of this checkpost, the block post. Another important thing that we can see from this video is the losses that the armed forces of Ukraine suffered during their presence on the territory of the city of Sudzha and the Sudzha region. So lots of vehicles were destroyed. We see drone was flying basically in the direction of the settlement by the name of Yunakivka and in the direction of the settlement by the name of Sumi, and we see tens vehicles that were destroyed. But all these things, all these losses is not the most important thing. The most important thing is coming right exactly from the final part of this video, and I would like to point your attention because now I understand that probably this moment was the most important reason why the Russians decided to begin their offensive operation in the Sumi direction, basically on the 8th of March by carrying out that special operation using the gas transportation system, basically using those pipelines. So this is the most important part of the video, and here we can see how the Russian drone entered some certain territory, and we can see a lot of constructions on both sides of the roads. One construction, second construction on the left side of the road, and the same number, the significant number of the same type of constructions from the Russian side. But here we can see nothing more, just these constructions on both sides of the road. But in the final part of the video we can see some green construction ahead of the Russian drone, and this is the nets. This is the protection nets above the most important supply line that used to go between the city of Sumi and the city of Sudzha. The Russian drone didn't fly further because most likely he is stuck in this construction and haven't managed to move further. But this is very important because I would like to point your attention that before the beginning of the Russian special operation using the gas transportation system, as I understand, the Ukrainians managed to secure a very huge part of the road from the city of Sumi towards the Sudzha direction. So basically all this road that right now I am coloring with the yellow line, basically before the beginning of the Russian offensive operation was already secured. So the Ukrainians managed to bring this tunnel, this protected tunnel, almost from the city of Sumi till this point. So if we try to calculate, we're gonna see that Ukrainians haven't managed to build just 1 kilometer to this checkpoint. So just 1 kilometer left for the Ukrainians to at least get this secure tunnel, this protected tunnel, almost to the border with the Russian Federation. And from this point the Ukrainians needed just another, let's calculate the distance, another several kilometers to build the same protected tunnel to the territory of Sumi itself, 7 kilometers. So summarizing everything, before the beginning of the Russian pipeline offensive operation, the Ukrainians, it was just almost 8.3 kilometers left for the Ukrainians to create completely protected tunnel, completely protected secure zone for the purpose to stable rotation, supply and support of the Ukrainian contingent on the territory of the settlement of Sudzha and the entire Sudzha region. So imagine yourself if the Ukrainians were able to finish this, let's say by the end of 2024. I'll remind you that Ukrainians entered the Sudzha region in the August of 2024, when almost nobody was talking about fiber optic drones. At that moment, those days, in August of 2024, it was almost unknown technology. And as a result of Ukraine offensive, they managed to establish complete control over the significant number of towns, villages and territories in this area. And then the Russians regrouped and began their own counteroffensive. And somewhere in September and early October, we started receiving first videos, first updates and first geolocations when the Russians began using fiber optic drones massively. There were a lot of videos, a lot of strikes, and then we realized that that technology was already something like a turning point technology that allowed the Russians basically to defeat the Ukrainians significantly and to deal all this damage that we could see 5 minutes ago in the video of how the Russian drone was flying above the main supply road. And the Ukrainians realized too late that it was that they should have built this secure tunnel, that they should have started building this secure tunnel a long time ago, obviously maybe in the August of 2024 or at least in the September. But the Ukrainians didn't start it, but when they started, as you can see, they have almost finished this construction, but the Russians began their offensive operation and basically they ruined the Ukrainian plans. Once again, imagine yourself if the Russians, let's say, started their pipeline operation not on the 8th of March, but let's say somewhere at the beginning of April, or let's say tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Obviously, the Ukrainians would be able to finish this construction, and obviously this would be completely different story and completely different battle. And I have some doubts whether the Russians would be able to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the territory of Sudzha so fast if the Ukrainians manage to finish the creation of this tunnel. I'm not trying to tell you that how exactly the situation would develop in this or that way. I'm just trying to tell you that these tunnels, these nets tunnels, is the future and basically the next stage of let's say technology race in the special military operation. I have no doubts that during 2025 we're gonna see hundreds of roads, hundreds of different towns completely covered with these nets constructions that will protect the logistic and supply and support of both the Russians and the Ukrainians. And basically, due to the fact that currently drones is the main weapon of both the Russians and the Ukrainians, we can make a conclusion that the next stage of the special military operation will be won by the side who is able to create much faster all these tunnels, all these protections above the main roads, and who is able to destroy the opponent's engineering equipment and the opponent's vehicles. So this is going to be the race. But according to let's say videos and according to information we are receiving from the line of combat contact, the Russians began constructions of these roads a long time ago. We received since the beginning of January probably hundreds of videos, tens of videos of how the Russians were improving their positions in the vicinity of Ivanovska and Bakhmut. For example, here we can see how the Russians just started this process. As you can see, just the regular soldiers were building these fortifications and these protections above the main supply roads, not like special professional constructions. As you can see, here we can see another video, another photo published by the Russians. And here we can see a very good video with a very good quality, and here we can see that the Russians are trying to protect not just regular roads, but the Russians are trying to cover even entire towns with these protection nets, with this type of defense. Once again, who can build faster and more of this type of protection most likely will win the entire military campaign of 2025, because now the quality and the effectiveness of FPV drones will depend just on this, who can build more and of this protection over the entire of their own logistic and supply lines. So this is the situation. Obviously this race is going to be very interesting, because now both sides will be forced to rely more on the engineering equipment and special stuff that can build such a protection, let's say roads faster than the opponent. Now let's move further, and furthermore, you will not be able to carry out any offensive operation without creating such roads behind the line of combat contact to secure and to improve your own logistic. Now let's discuss the situation in the Belgorod direction, and in comparison with the previous days we can see right now completely different picture. Before the beginning of talks in Riyadh, the Ukrainians made lots of attempts to attack the Russian positions. At some points they managed to break through, so we got yesterday lots of geolocations that confirmed the Ukrainian presence on the territory of Demidovka. Today several neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians were trying to attack the settlement by the name of Popovka, but all those attacks were repelled. And as for the 25th of March, I'm telling the truth, during the day we haven't received almost anything about any attempts to attack from the Ukrainian side, which means that the negotiation process ended and most likely the Ukrainians decided to stop their offensives as well. Maybe the Ukrainians are regrouping after losses they suffered during the previous attempts, and maybe in the very near future they will resume their attempts to attack. But as for now, we see that Ukrainians are not attacking anymore, and so let's wait and see, of course, what is going to be next. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupiansk direction. And telling the truth, we're going to talk not just about the Kupiansk direction, but probably about the area of the general battle that most likely is going to take place in 2025. And the general battle of 2025, we believe, is going to take place for the Donbas arc, the heart of the Donbas arc operation. These are the settlements of Liman, Siversk, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka. So these territories, the primary target for the Russians for the almost entire 2025, and telling the truth, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly during the previous days. First, let's talk about the northern flank. Today we got report that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Mirna. This information was provided by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, and based on this report we have adjusted the map. So now we can see that the Russians approach the settlement of Zarechna and Tarskoye from the north, and now they have no barriers to attack further in the southern direction and to answer both villages that are located on the both sides of the river of Zherebets. The Russians have already begun bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions on the northern outskirts of the both settlements. This is something like already artillery preparation. In this video we can see the accurate strike with the use of Krasnopol from the Russian side carried out by the Russians. In this video we can see several FPV drone attacks on the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. So summarizing everything, we see that the Russians intensify their activities in this area, and we understand that most likely the Russians are about to begin their final offensive. This settlement, this small agglomeration of two villages, Zarechna and Tarskoye, is very important for the Ukrainians, because if Ukrainians lose this territory, if the Russians are able to maintain the lines and basically to shorten them along this red line, then this is going to be a complete disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine that are currently located in the city of Siversk, because we see that the days of Siversk are numbered, and most likely the battle for this territory is going to start very soon. Furthermore, today, we can't say that they are very reliable, but several pro-Russian resources today reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions in the Serebryanka forest further and around the settlements of Yampol, Liman and Zarechna. So let's take a look at how the map was changing. So this is the situation by the end of the 24th of March, and this is the situation by the end of the 25th of March. So once again, several sources reported that the Russians during the previous several days managed to improve their positions in this triangle between the settlements of Yampol, Liman and Zarechna, and the Russians continue digging in deeper between settlements, trying to cut this territory into many pieces. And we can already see from this configuration that the settlements of Zarechna and Tarskoye have been already caught in cauldron and caught by the Russians in pincers from the north and from the south, which means that we believe that the days for these two villages are numbered, obviously numbered. Once again, when talking about this Russian progress between Yampol and Zarechna, we have just one pro-Russian resource who reported about the situation. This source says that he has very close and tight relations with the Group of Forces West, and the Group of Forces West is responsible for every single offensive operation along the river of Oskol, so in this part of the front line, and this is the only source that reported about such a significant progress of the Russians in this side. And we see that if the Russians are able to cut Zarechna, Tarskoye, and if the Russians are able to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Yampol and to establish the front line along this red line, this is going to be once again a very huge disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine in the city of Siversk, because from this configuration the distance between the edge positions of the Russians from the southern part, from the settlement of, let's say, Fedorovka, and the Russian positions in the area of Yampol would be less than 20 kilometers, so 10 kilometers for both sides, for the northern one and the southern one. And once again, we are coming back to the topic of creating of the nets protections along the main supply lines. And telling the truth, it's time for the Ukrainians to start thinking about this, not even to start thinking about this. Telling the truth, the Ukrainians should have finished the constructions of these nest protections along these main supply lines a long time ago, because if the Ukrainians haven't built all these constructions in this area, this means that Ukrainians are completely unprotected against the Russian FPV drones. That's most likely we are going to see in the very near future. Of course, you may ask why the Russians still haven't established any control over these territories. The question is, and the answer to this question is very simple. The Russians, till the last moment, basically didn't want to show the exact direction of the major offensive operation. So now, at least for me, everything is clear. The major offensive operation is going to take place on the arc between the city of Liman and the city of Konstantinovka, because as you can see, there are two salients. This is the first, the salient of Siversk, and this is the second salient, the salient of the village of Zarya. And now the Russians will try to cut both salients, which will allow them to defeat the Ukrainians. That can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense in the northern salient and in the southern salient, and this can lead to complete collapse of the entire defense in Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomerations. We can't say exactly when exactly the Russians are planning to begin this final Siversk offensive operation, but once again we believe that the days are numbered, and this offensive should start in the middle spring, in the somewhere in April, or even maybe in the late March, because once again, if the Russians are already in the vicinity of Yampol, maybe we have already become witnesses of the beginning of this general battle. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern salient, where the Russians also several days ago began their decisive offensive operation, and as a result of clashes during the first days, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Alexandropol, and the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Pantelimonievka. As for now, we don't have any geolocations, we don't have any report, any confirmations from the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. We have just reports mainly from neutral, pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian, neutral and pro-Russian resources. The pro-Ukrainian sources haven't confirmed this information, but anyway, it's just the beginning. We see that the Russians are advancing, and the Russians will try to take this salient under complete control, and they will try to maintain the lines, obviously along the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir and further in the direction of the city of Chasiv. So this is the general battle, and this is exactly how the Russians are planning this battle. It's just a question what the Ukrainians are planning to do with this. Obviously, they need to start thinking about these protection nets. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk, where the Russians continue their defense operation, and now it's have become clear that the Russians at the beginning had no plans to begin any offensive operation with the purpose to establish control over the city of Pokrovsk. The Russians don't have this plan. The main purpose of the Russians is to hold this salient as long as possible. The reason of this, let's say, salient, and the main purpose of this salient is to cut at least one of the supply lines that Ukrainians used to have to support their forces in the area of Konstantinovka. Now the Ukrainians have problems with logistics because the Russians just established physical control over this railway, and now the Russians have established complete artillery probably control over the next railway, so the Ukrainians have very poor logistics in Kramatorsk-Slavyansk. At least they have worse logistic than they used to have, and the Russians are not going to attack further. The main purpose of them is to hold their lines as long as possible under the attacks of the armored force of the Russian Federation, and the Russians will do this no matter the price they're gonna pay for this. The Ukrainians continue counterattacks. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and restore their positions in the villages of Shevchenka, Pishchane. We have geolocations that confirm that the Russians managed to restore control over several tactical positions, and now the Ukrainians, due to the fact that they lost their tactical positions, they began counter-offensive operation in the direction of Salone, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians, as a result of another counter-attack, managed to improve their positions on the territory of the settlement. And now we see the main purpose and the main plan of the Ukrainians. They basically try to cut this salient and to restore logistic between, let's say, the mainland and of course the heart of the Donbas arc operation between the settlements of Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka. Because if the Ukrainians can't restore this logistic, they will suffer significant problems during the general battle. And that's it. This is the only, let's say, task for the Russians. Another important video came from the southern part of Pokrovsk. Here we can see how the Russians, as a result of missile strike, destroyed the dam in this area, and the main purpose of this attack, once again, to ruin the roads of possible Ukrainian counterattacks, not to allow the Ukrainians to counterattack, with the purpose to cut the salient. And obviously this defense operation in the southwestern of city of Pokrovsk will go in history, because the Russians are, as for now, they're acting very successfully. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. The only important update we got is that the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to enter the village of Vilnaya Polya. We have geolocation that confirms the Russian presence on the southeastern part of this village. As for the Porozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours we got an important report that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Mali Sherbaki. This information was confirmed by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, we have geolocation that confirmed the Russian presence in the southern part of the settlement of Lapkova. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking the Russian units in the central part of this settlement. Based on this geolocation and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted these parts in the Russian favor. So as you can see, we're getting closer and closer to the general battle of 2025. This is going to be a very long battle, very difficult battle, and the parties have already begun preparation for it. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.